Today, we examine the case of a missing cyclist, a remote Scottish road, and a trail of silence that stretched for nearly 3 years. He was a retired soldier, a father, and a man of steady habits until one October night, he disappeared without a sound. The search was relentless, but the Highlands kept their secret. That is, until a discarded can beneath the heatherrand, the courage of a woman once close to the killer uncovered what police had missed all along. According to investigators, what followed was a case of calculated deception, staged evidence, and a murder hidden beneath the very landscape meant to bring peace. The man who vanished had no enemies, at least none visible. But behind the stillness of the glens, something darker had always been waiting. But before we take you deeper into this chilling story, make sure you subscribe and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Ewan MacLeod wasn't a man drawn to noise. He had lived a quiet life in the northern reaches of the Scottish Highlands, where the hills rise like solemn witnesses and the roads cut through mist and stone. In the village of Loughnara, where he'd settled after retiring from the Royal Scots Regiment, Ewan was known for his discipline, his calm voice, and his solitary bike rides. People said he was the sort of man who never asked for attention, but somehow always earned respect. According to his daughter, Isla MacLeod, Ewan believed in routines. He woke before dawn, walked the same wooded path near his cottage, and cycled the same long stretch of road nearly every evening. His favorite route along the edge of the It known to locals for its sweeping bends, unpredictable weather, and breathtaking views of Loch Lorne. He called it the best kind of silence. Ewan was 63. He had spent decades in military service, first as a combat medic, later in logistics. He'd seen war zones, nursed dying men, and buried friends. But by the time he returned to civilian life, he wanted none of that behind his front door. He wanted stillness, and maybe, if life allowed, a second chance at love. That chance arrived in the form of Fiona Sinclair. Fiona was 35 when she met Ewantal, soft-spoken, and newly hired as the librarian at a local primary school. According to friends, their first meeting took place at a village fundraiser where Fiona had been reading poems to children and Ewan stood awkwardly at the back, sipping black tea. They exchanged only a few words that night, but something lingered. Within weeks, they were spending time together walking trails, discussing literature, and learning to navigate the gap in their ages with humor and care. Fiona had no children. Ewan had one grown daughter and a few emotional walls. But what emerged between them wasn't flashy. It was grounded, slow, and unshakable. By the spring of the following year, Fiona moved into Ewan's modest stone cottage near Corriedale, a wooded hollow just beyond the village. Locals described them as quiet but clearly devoted. There were whispered plans of a small wedding, possibly a civil ceremony on the banks of the loch, but it was Fiona's announcement one rainy afternoon in early autumn that changed the rhythm of their lives. She was pregnant. According to Fiona's later statement to police, Ewan wept when he heard. He hadn't imagined becoming a father again at his age, but once the shock settled, he leaned into the idea with his usual precision researching cribs, budgeting school funds, even asking his friend in Inverness where to find the best prams. He seemed lighter, Fiona recalled, hopeful, like a man suddenly standing in a new kind of light. And yet, not everything around them was steady. There was one name Ewan rarely spoke aloud, a man from his past, someone who had once been a friend, later a source of unease. His name was Gavin Munro. According to notes later recovered from Fiona's personal journal, Ewan had once helped Gavin during a difficult financial period, loaning him money after a failed land sale and helping cover medical costs for Gavin's elderly father. But when Ewan tried to recoup the debt months later, the relationship soured. They argued in public once, behind the village pub. A witness claimed Ewan had returned home that night with bruised knuckles and a cracked phone screen, though he never filed a report. Fiona would later tell police she believed Ewan was trying to protect her. He wanted peace, she wrote, even when someone else wanted power. Despite that shadow, the days leading up to his disappearance were calm. Fiona said they spent the last evening together watching old episodes of All Creatures Great and Small while folding baby clothes. Ewan talked about naming the child something strong, maybe Hamish, if it was a boy. She laughed and told him that sounded like a farmer's dog. Then, on October 7th, Ewan put on his cycling gear and headed out just after 6 p.m. The wind was picking up. The air had that Highland sharpness, wet leaves, and warning. Fiona watched from the doorway. one hand resting on her pregnant belly as he rode down the gravel path and disappeared into the trees. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. By morning, the fog had thickened over Loch Nara, curling through fence posts and woodland like a veil. Ewan McLeod's tea mug still sat on the table, the water inside cold. His cycling gloves, usually dropped carelessly on the arm of the sofa, were gone. But his phone, the one he never left behind, was still on the kitchen counter, its battery dead. According to Fiona Sinclair, she hadn't panicked at first. Ewan was known to take longer rides when he needed to clear his mind. But by noon, her calls to friends, neighbors, and local cafes turned up nothing. He hadn't been seen, hadn't stopped for coffee, hadn't returned to any familiar places, and the weather windy and wet only deepened her worry. By late afternoon, Fiona reported Ewan missing to police. Officers from the Northern Constabulary arrived at the cottage within the hour. According to the initial incident report, there were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle, no unusual footprints around the property. Fiona handed them Ewan's cycling routia list of known paths he preferred and a recent photo taken at a charity ride just a week prior. In it, Ewan stood beside his black road bike, windbreaker zipped to the neck, squinting against the light. Search and rescue teams were deployed within 24 hours. According to Detective Inspector Malcolm Fraser, who would later lead the case, it was one of the most expansive rural searches launched in that region in recent years. Dozens of volunteers joined the effort. Retired hill walkers, forestry workers, even shepherds who knew the terrain by heart. Helicopters combed the lochs. Police dogs scoured ravines and fallen branches. Still, nothing. Not a jacket, not a tire track, not a trace. The 82, where Ewan was known to cycle, runs like a black ribbon along steep ridges and unpredictable weather. On the night he vanished, records show wind gusts reached 40 miles per hour. Some speculated Ewan had lost control of the bike and fallen into water. Others suggested exposure or a medical event. But Fiona refused to believe it. She knew her partner's habits. According to her, Ewan didn't ride unprepared. He wore reflective gear. He carried a thermal blanket. He avoided steep inclines in rain. Then came the discovery 11 days after Ewan was last seen. A forestry worker assigned to clear overgrown brambles on a disused access path near Inveroran Forest came across a bicycle propped unnaturally against a pine tree. The black frame matched the description of Ewan's. According to the police log, the scene appeared untouched by weather, oddly clean. The position of the bike upright, balanced, seemed almost staged. No mud spatter, no bent frame, no clothing nearby, no signs of impact or distress. Detective Sergeant Isla Cameron, present at the scene, later told the inquiry that the location felt wrong in a quiet, deliberate way. The access path where the bike was found had not been part of the original search grid. It was several miles off Ewan's usual route and rarely used. Fiona, upon being informed, reacted not with hope, but dread. He would never ride that way, she told officers. Never. Investigators ordered forensic testing of the bike. The results revealed no fingerprints, neither Ewan's nor anyone else's. The tires showed no recent wear. The chain was still oiled. It was as if the bicycle had never been ridden that night at all. With no evidence of foul play and no body, police were reluctant to escalate the case. It remained classified as a missing person, and within weeks, media attention faded. According to internal case reviews, the investigation slowed significantly during the winter months. But Fiona Sinclair did not slow. Heavily pregnant and unwilling to let silence settle over the disappearance, she began her own inquiries. She traced Ewan's last digital footprints, bank statements, email logins, weather alerts. She rewalked his favorite trails, made a public appeal through local radio, and kept a notebook with theories, names, and memories. One of those names appeared more than once: Gavin Monroe, a man whose past with Ewan had soured into something quiet and unresolved. A man who had reason to hold a grudge and who, despite living only 15 minutes from Inveroran Forest, had never once volunteered to join the search. It was the sharp-eyed persistence of one woman, not the force of law, that reawakened the investigation into Ewan McLeod's disappearance. By December, the hills of Loch Nara had begun their long winter hush, snow dusting the edges of the glens. The case had slipped from headlines, but inside her dimly lit cottage, Fiona Sinclair kept digging. She started with Gavin Monroe. According to Fiona's notes, Ewan and Gavin had known each other for over a decade, first through mutual acquaintances later through odd handyman jobs and land disputes. Ewan had once vouched for Gavin during a background check for a seasonal wildlife warden, contract only to later regret it when Gavin was accused of poaching red deer. Nothing ever came of the charge. But Ewan, Fiona recalled, had begun keeping his distance after that. Still, when Gavin asked to borrow money's $500 to settle property taxes on his late father's estate, Ewan agreed. According to Fiona, that was in the spring of the same year he vanished. By summer, Gavin had stopped answering Ewan's calls. When Ewan confronted him, an argument broke out behind the local pub. A broken phone, bruised knuckles, and an uneasy silence followed. It wasn't enough for police to act on, but Fiona's gut told her it meant something. And then, in January, 3 months after Ewan's disappearance, she found something strange. She had been walking through Corey Dell, a woodland near where the bicycle had been discovered, when she noticed a bright flash of red wedged beneath a tree stump naturally clean against the frostbitten moss. A crushed Red Bull can. On its own, it might have meant nothing, but according to Fiona's private statement to police, Ewan despised energy drinks, calling them motor oil for amateurs. Gavin Monroe, however, drank them habitually. She'd smelled them on his breath the few times he dropped by the house, seen the cans in the footwell of his truck. That detailed the can, the location was enough to convince her. She took photos and handed them to Detective Sergeant Isla Cameron, who had stayed loosely connected to the case. According to internal police memos, DS Cameron agreed the find was unusual enough to warrant a second look. A new search was ordered, this time focusing not on open terrain but secluded woodland, narrow animal paths, and low-growth bracken. The dogs found something first. Roughly 200 yards from where the can had been discovered, a cadaver dog signaled interest near a patch of dense heather and shallow root clusters. Forensic teams descended within the hour. Beneath just 14 inches of disturbed soil, they uncovered fragmented human remains. The body was badly decomposed, consistent with several months of exposure. There were signs of trauma to the skull. Pieces of navy blue synthetic fabric matching Ewan's windbreaker were found clinging to the soil. According to forensic pathologist Dr. Lorna Kessler, the remains were confirmed through dental records as Ewan McLeod. She later testified that while the body was incomplete, injuries were indicative of blunt force trauma consistent with a heavy instrument, possibly a metal bar or timber. Fiona was notified in person. She did not cry. "I already knew," she said. With the remains recovered, the case officially transitioned from missing person to homicide. Investigators turned back to Gavin Monroe. According to mobile phone data obtained by police, his handset had pinged off a tower near Corey Dell the night Ewan vanished, despite Gavin's claim he was helping a neighbor move livestock 40 miles away in Baltimore. That neighbor, Ronnie Kerr, had died 3 months before. Detective Inspector Malcolm Fraser called the timing of the lie catastrophic. Surveillance footage reviewed from a petrol station near Glen Edive, taken at 10:34 p.m. on the night in question, showed a dark green Land Rover idling near the forecourt. Its rear compartment was covered with a tarp. Though the driver never exited the vehicle registration partially visible matched one registered to Gavin Monroe. And still, Gavin said nothing. He declined formal interview requests, citing stress. He refused to speak to Fiona. But according to sources close to the investigation, police had already begun drafting a formal arrest warrant. All they needed was one final break. And it came not from forensic science or digital trails, but from a moment Gavin never intended anyone to hear. The pressure on Gavin Monroe had been building quietly, like a storm too far off to hear. But it was Fiona Sinclair again who caught the first sound of thunder. According to later testimony, Fiona had returned to work part-time at the village library just after the new year. On a damp Thursday afternoon in February, Gavin entered the building. He didn't check out a book. He didn't ask for directions. Instead, he stood silently near the back shelves, watching Fiona from a distance. When she met his gaze, he gave a single nod, then turned and walked out. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 minutes. That same evening, Fiona retrieved the voice recorder she had been using to document her thoughts for a possible civil case. It was tucked into the kitchen drawer, switched on more often than not, and as she prepared to distracted, exhausted, she accidentally hit playback. The recording that played was muffled at first. Wind, footsteps, then, unmistakably, Gavin's voice. The file had been captured several weeks earlier when Fiona had walked past Gavin's property on her way to the market. Her recorder, hidden in her coat pocket, had picked up a short, clipped exchange between Gavin and another man unintelligible at first, but ending with a sentence that hit her like a blow. He should have kept his mouth shut. No one needed to know about that night. Fiona froze. She replayed it. Then she called the police. According to the report filed by Detective Sergeant Isla Cameron, the audio was ambiguous but contextually suspicious. It wasn't enough on its own, but when added to the body of existing evidence, the phone records, the CCTV, the false alibi, was damning. The arrest came quietly. At 6:42 a.m. on March 20, officers surrounded Gavin Monroe's property at the edge of Loch Kylich. According to the arrest log, he did not resist, but neither did he speak. He was taken into custody and held at the Inverness Detention Center under suspicion of murder. For nearly 48 hours, Gavin said nothing. Then, in a moment police still describe as unexpected and chilling, he began to talk. According to the interview transcript, Gavin admitted to meeting Ewan McLeod the night he disappeared. He claimed Ewan had confronted him once again about the unpaid debt, threatening to involve solicitors. The two men argued near the Corriedale trailhead, where Gavin claimed he had gone to clear his head. Gavin's version of the story was defensive, fragmented, and full of contradictions. He claimed the confrontation turned physical, that he grabbed a broken branch from the ground, that he struck Ewan once, maybe twice, that it wasn't meant to go that far. But when asked about the burial, the staged bicycle, and the fabricated alibi, Gavin's tone shifted. "I panicked. I thought if I made it look like he just disappeared, maybe no one would think twice." He offered no remorse, no apology. When asked why he hadn't called for help or reported the incident, Gavin allegedly replied, "He was already gone. What was the point?" According to court documents, Gavin led detectives to the precise location where he had buried Ewan's wallet and ID separate from the main burial site, under a pile of firewood behind his tool shed. The items were partially decomposed, but forensic examiners confirmed the presence of Ewan's fingerprints on several cards inside. The confession solidified the case. Prosecutors now had motive, opportunity, physical evidence, and a recorded statement. When Fiona was informed, she asked only one question. Did he say Ewan's name? They told her yes. She nodded. Then she asked for space. The trial began 6 months later at the Inverness High Court. It was attended by members of both families, local reporters, and residents of Loch Nera who had once shared pints with both men. The mood was heavy, the proceedings clinical. Prosecutors detailed Gavin's history of financial instability, his mounting resentment toward Ewan, and his attempts to evade suspicion. According to court observers, Fiona Sinclair's testimony was the most difficult and the most devastating. She spoke softly, often pausing to collect herself. She described Ewan's final weeks, the night he vanished, and the moment she realized she had to become her own investigator. "I was carrying our child," she said, "and I knew the man who should have come home never would again." Her words echoed through the courtroom. On the 28th of September, under gray Highland skies, a jury returned its verdict. Gavin Monroe was found guilty of the murder of Ewan McLeod and of attempting to conceal the crime through a calculated deception. The courtroom was hushed as the sentence was read: life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. According to trial reporters from the Inverness Courier, Monroe showed no visible emotion, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his hands resting on the edge of the defendant's table like stone. But in the gallery, a different reaction played out. Several villagers wept. Others stared silently at the man they had once waved to on narrow streets, now revealed to be something else entirely. Fiona Sinclair did not cry. She sat upright, her infant son Ewan Jr. in her arms. The child was quiet, asleep against her shoulder. She said nothing until after the courtroom emptied, when a reporter gently asked her what justice meant. "It means my son will grow up knowing the truth," she answered, "and knowing that silence didn't win." The conviction closed the legal chapter, but the story was far from over. According to statements made by Detective Inspector Malcolm Fraser, the case triggered an internal review within the Northern Constabulary. While ultimately successful, the investigation had suffered early missteps, most notably the initial classification of Ewan's disappearance as non-suspicious and the delayed expansion of the search zone beyond familiar paths. The bicycle positioned so precisely it should have raised red flags had not been forensically tested until nearly 3 weeks. By then, weather and handling had compromised potential evidence. Fiona, who had spent months acting as a de facto investigator, filed a formal complaint against the local police for negligence and mishandling of evidence. The complaint was later escalated to the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, PERC, Scotland's independent body for law enforcement oversight. According to a statement released by PERC, the review found significant procedural oversights, including a failure to prioritize personal testimony from Fiona and delays in securing key forensic sites. While no officers were formally charged, recommendations were issued for retraining in missing persons protocol, particularly in rural environments. The fallout within the village of Loughnara was emotional and complex. Monroe's family, longtime residents of the area, left their home within days of the sentencing. The cottage was later listed for sale, its windows boarded and garden overgrown. A sign posted by local council read simply, "No trespassing, private property." Ewan MacLeod was laid to rest in Craigmore Cemetery, a small hillside burial ground overlooking the loch he once cycled past each morning. His funeral was attended by veterans from his former regiment, neighbors, teachers, and strangers who had followed the case. According to those present, the ceremony was quiet but deeply personal. A bugle played "The Last Post." Fiona read a poem. The stone that marks his grave reads, "Ewan MacLeod, 1960, 2023. In the months following the trial, Fiona Sinclair began to speak publicly not only about Ewan's case, but about the many others like it that never made headlines. She partnered with the Scottish Centre for Justice and Advocacy, delivering talks about victims' rights, investigative accountability, and the quiet burden families are forced to carry when authorities fall short. According to the center's director, Fiona became an unshakable voice for those who are too often ignored. She declined offers for book deals and TV rights, stating that the story belonged to her son first and to justice second. Fiona eventually left the cottage in Corriedale. Too many memories, too many ghosts. She moved south to Stirling, where she began work as a librarian at a university campus. Her son, now a toddler, bears the same steady gaze as the man whose name he carries. Every year, on the anniversary of Ewan's death, Fiona returns quietly to the Highlands. She visits Craigmore Cemetery, lays a single white thistle on the grave, and walks the old trail through Inveroran Forest, now part of a protected memorial corridor renamed in his honor, MacLeod's Way. According to the local council, the path serves as both a remembrance and a Warninga reminder that justice sometimes lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to keep asking questions.